Well, good day, good afternoon, good morning, good morrow, whatever phrase might enliven you and make you feel happy to be here. That's the greeting we've offered. It's good to be with you here at Calling from the Wilderness. This is our 28th session and our second session overall, looking at Samson, the life of Samson in the book of Judges. Last week, we had a fantastic conversation with a good friend of ours, Kyle Lamenda. If you haven't watched that one, I highly recommend you go and check that one out. Maybe even look at it before this one, as it might give you a bit more context for the life of Samson as we head a little bit more into the kind of the later years of his life, having looked at the prophecy and his birth before this. My name is Timothy Miller, and I'm a priest in the Church of England and in London, England. Currently serving a couple of small churches, a couple of parish churches up in the area of Highgate. And I'm joined by my very good friend on the other side of the world, Derek Wilson. Derek, currently church coordinator, is the kind of the main title, and then there's a lot of other works and titles that get thrown around after that, with the work that he does in St. Andrew's. Is that right? St. Andrew's Presbyterian in Duncan. As well, just want to say a quick shout out and a hello to those of you who have recently subscribed and are now getting the updates when new things come up. Please do feel free not just to subscribe, but to send and drop some messages. Let us know what's resonating and what's not. If there's a passage particularly that you want to look at, or if there's something you think that we are way out of line with, or you want to hear more about, that would be another one. We would love to hear from you. Just to say that we kind of have a pattern of kind of 4 weeks where we look at a section of passages for 3 weeks, and then on the fourth week we revisit them all. So if you do have a question or if you have a thought, make sure you're putting those in during those 3 weeks, and we really will look at those as kind of part of our 4-week reflection and review. So anything you think we need to add, Derek?
Yeah, with us looking at the verses, we don't normally look at the more popular passages. Like we're looking at Samson, but we're looking at more the setup to him and that. Or when we looked at Abraham, we looked at some of the more lesser known or lesser looked at passages. So just a heads up, if you're like, I'm going to do the story of Samson and how he tore down the temple, we
May not
I
get
don't know
there.
if we're gonna get to that, but we more look at the more obscure ones.
Yeah.
And when you were saying like good morning and good evening and that reminded me of that. Remember that Sharon Lois and Bran
Oh yeah.
group? And it was like, I love you in the morning and in the afternoon. I love you in the evening and underneath the moon. Skimmer dinky dinky. Oh yes, skimmer doo. I love you. It just came to my mind, and I'm like, I haven't heard that song in 70 years. So maybe that's a callback that some of our listeners will
Amazing.
enjoy. Sharon Lois and
Amazing.
Bran,
Yeah. So if you're still with us, you've
if you're
got it.
still with us,
Got it.
if you were
Yeah,
back the
yeah.
1920s.
Amazing, amazing. Well, with that lovely introduction of Sharon, Lois, and Bram, let's dive into Samson here. So our passage today, and as Derek said, we do try. Well, we pick a smaller section of passage than you might think would be sensible, and that gives us the ability to just kind of sit in it, hear the words, listen to what God is saying to it, listen to what each other is kind of saying in the midst of it. And we do try to pick passages that often don't get kind of sat in. And so this one here, I hope you really enjoy. So this is Judges 14, 1-9, and I'll get Derek to kick us off to read it first.
Samson went down to Timnah, and at Timnah he saw one of the daughters of the Philistines. And he came up and told his father and mother, I saw one of the daughters of the Philistines at Timnah. Now get her for me as a wife. But his father and mother said to him, Is there not a woman among the daughters of your relatives, or among all your people, that you must go to take a wife from the uncircumcised Philistines? But Samson said to his father, Get her for me, for she is right in my eyes. His father and mother did not know that it was from the Lord, for he was seeking an opportunity against the Philistines. At that time, the Philistines ruled over Israel. Then Samson went down with his father and mother to Timnah, and they came to the vineyards of Timnah, and behold, a young lion came toward him, roaring. The Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him, and although he had nothing but his hand, he tore the lion in pieces as one tears a young goat. But he did not tell his father or his mother what he had done. Then he went down and talked with the woman, and she was right in Samson's eyes. After some days he returned to take her, and he turned aside to see the carcass of the lion, and behold, there was a swarm of bees in the body of the lion, and honey. He scraped it out with his hands and went on, eating as he went. And when he came to his father and mother, and gave some to them, and they ate. But he did not tell them that he had scraped the honey from the carcass of a lion.
Samson went down to Timnah, and at Timnah he saw one of the daughters of the Philistines. Then he came up and told his father and mother, I saw one of the daughters of the Philistines at Timnah. Now get her for me as my wife. But his father and mother said to him, Is there not a woman among the daughters of your relatives or among all our people that you must go and take a wife from the uncircumcised Philistines? But Samson said to his father, Get her for me, for she is right in my eyes. His father and mother did not know that it was from the Lord, for he was seeking an opportunity against the Philistines. At the time, the Philistines ruled over Israel. Then Samson went down with his father and mother to Timnah, and they came to the vineyards of Timnah. And behold, a young lion came toward him roaring. Then the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him, and although he had nothing in his hand, he tore the lion in pieces as one tears a young goat. But he did not tell his father or mother what he had done. And he went down and talked with the woman, and she was right in Samson's eyes. After some days he returned to take her, and he turned aside to see the carcass of the lion, and behold, there was a swarm of bees in the body of the lion, and honey. He scraped it out into his hands and went on, eating as he went. And as he came to his father and mother and gave some to them, they ate. But he did not tell them that he had scraped the honey from the carcass of the lion. Well, Derek, there's a few options to pick from, but is there anything in particular that jumped
I
out
have
to
so
you?
many questions or things that stood out to me. Um, One is like he's throwing a tantrum in the beginning, like now
Yeah,
get her for me as a wife. Like it's a 2 year old who
yeah,
wants a toy in the store
yeah,
and definitely sees her as an object. I don't know how you could say
yeah,
that any other way.
yeah.
Um, yeah, and like grabbing the honey from the carcass of the lion. First of all, is that good honey? Like it just seems weird. Like, are they getting the stuff from the lion to put in the honey? Like, does it just taste like rotting meat? Because that's gross. Secondly, if I'm on a journey, I don't want sticky hands. Like, I'm not putting my hand in honey and then walking. Like, that just seems very, because there's no way to
Yeah,
get honey off your hand. Like, you can't clean it with your
yeah,
mouth good enough to get the stickiness off. That just seems like a terrible journey after that.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No,
And
yeah, I could completely agree. I think we've got the temper tantrum from Samson. We've got this strange situation where too the story is not written in a way that actually, like, he's traveling with his parents, but then he's alone with a lion. Then he goes by himself, and then he comes back and he's got sticky hands, and his parents are like, "Oh, thanks for the honey." Like it's all
it's
a bit
like
weird.
rotting meat. Like that lion's been there for what, 2, 3 days? Like it's not good meat anymore.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
also
What do
tear
you got?
the lion apart like you would a young goat. Is that a
Mm.
common practice in this time where they would tear goats apart with their bare hands. Like, is it some kind of for sacrifice? It's just easier to rip their jaw open than it is to sacrifice on the altar. Like,
Yeah, yeah. Uh,
very, very many
X.
questions.
Yeah, yeah. So, are you feeling? Do you feel you have any kind of specific thoughts or questions for where you want to start, or are we looking just to hit the timer and see what happens?
Um, I find it fun, or I would like to talk about how he picks this woman to be his wife, and his parents
Mhm.
are saying, pick someone from your own group, not these uncircumcised Philistines.
Mhm.
Um, but they did not know it was for the Lord, for he was seeking an opportunity against the Philistines.
Mhm.
And so the Lord is using this woman as a pawn to rile up the strength of Samson that he gave to destroy the Philistines instead of
Mhm.
just riling up Samson. Like, does Samson really need this motivation to go after them? Could the Lord not just put that desire in his heart?
Mhm.
Or the righteous anger of the Lord, or whatever you want to call it?
Mhm.
It just seems like there's a lot of steps here that have to go in order
Yeah.
for this to happen. And
Mhm.
maybe it's more complicated than it needs to be. But maybe
Yeah.
that's just me thinking the straightest way to A to B is a straight line, but sometimes you got to go in a couple different directions and that.
Or the straightest way between Samson and a bee is a dead carcass of a lion. So,
Yes,
slight
yes.
variation. Yeah.
Between A Samson and B B's
Is the
is
lion. Yeah.
is
Uh,
C the carcass of the lion. Species of Samson.
yeah. Yeah. I think one of the things as I say, there's those crazy things in this small, like there's 9 verses, and you could take any one of the verses pretty much and be on it for hours wondering what does it actually mean, or looking at the context and things like that. But I do find it interesting that the only reference to God is that one sense of validating Samson's temper tantrum. um, or no, sorry, I guess there's the two. There's the validation of Samson's temper tantrum, and then there's the Lord giving him strength so that he doesn't get devoured by a lion. Um, but it also makes me wonder, actually, like, and I think can't remember if this was in the recording last week, or just part of our conversation, but it's just like, I'm beginning to think that Samson was not somebody who actually looked impressive to look at. Like, you know, when people are kind of constantly surprised at his strength, which doesn't make me think that he's actually like, a 6'8", muscle builder. Like, he's not, I always imagine him to be like The Rock,
Yeah.
Dwayne Johnson, The Rock. And now I'm beginning to think that he's probably not, like, he's a little bit maybe more like Steve Urkel than,
Yeah.
let's do like the old school throwbacks. We've got, yeah, we've got the skinny Marinky Dinky Dink. We've got Steve Urkel, and we've got the original Rock.
Yeah.
And so should we start the timer then?
Well, in that is, I just wonder, like, because he didn't want to tell his mother and father where it came from. Was he scared to tell him that he ripped apart a lion because then they wouldn't let him walk alone? Because they're so shocked at his strength. Like, if their son is the Rock, and they say, the size of that, and you wouldn't be worried that he's walking out alone or whatever. But if he looks like Steve Urkel, you might be more scared or more worried about him. You'd
Yeah,
be like,
yeah, yeah.
well,
Or like Jimmy Neutron.
Jimmy Neutron.
Zaria's got me into Jimmy Neutron. I got her. Well, I introduced her to it, and she loves it. So,
Nice,
but
nice.
like, I do think that maybe let's just start there, because I think what I do find fascinating about having read the passage last week and this week is Samson's parents, like, I don't. There's this weird space that they occupy in that, like, his dad seems to be somebody who's incapable of believing anything other than what his own eyes see. And then we got like his mom, who's never named, even though his dad is.
Yeah.
And then here, like, they seem to be almost afraid of him. Like, and that's why I kind of wonder if there's like this kind of almost like this strange unexpected strength that like to look on him, everyone might think he's just like this kind of lovely little boy or man, and everyone's like, oh, isn't he, Samson, isn't he so cute with his long hair? And then it's like, and then who it reminds me of is Bam Bam on the Flintstones.
Oh, okay.
Like,
I was
so
thinking
so we've got,
Superman as a baby lifting
oh,
cars and stuff, and his parents being like,
yeah,
"What is going on?" He's like super
yeah.
strong, breaking cribs. But yeah, Bam Bam. Yeah,
Yeah. So you got like this like cute little kid, lots of hair, and the parents are like, he can't drink alcohol, he can't shave his head, he can't eat anything unclean. And then somehow, when the Spirit of God comes on him, he literally turns into the Hulk. There.
now, would the honey be unclean because it's in a dead body?
That's a very good question, Derek. Very good question. Because what seems to be unclean in the passage before, it's about like the is it the animals with hooves,
Yeah,
like the cloven hooves. Um,
yeah,
but yeah, he's eating something from a dead body.
yeah.
And yes, it might
Definitely
not be
a
the
dead body.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But I also like with the parents. I wouldn't. Maybe it's not even just fear of his strength, but it's also a, I don't say reverence, but a unhealthy um, caution to his calling,
Mm,
where they know he's called to do something great and stuff, and they're worried to almost intervene when necessary, um, because they know something bigger is going on.
mm,
And so, even with that passage, with finding his wife, find someone like the normal thing. The right thing is to find someone in your own group.
mm,
They said no, find the Philistine woman, because the Lord was using them, looking for an opportunity to go against the Philistines. So maybe that's happened before, and they kind of understand that things aren't as clear with Samson as they would with other children in Israel, because he is special and there's something different going on with him,
mm, mm, mm.
for right or for wrong, because
Yeah, yeah.
sometimes we can, maybe with leaders, I know I've worked with a couple Christian leaders where there's been a reverence about around what they do
Mm,
and who they are, but then you get to know them, or whatever, and you're like, you should really be have been called out more than you have, but people are
mm,
worried about um, you
mm.
know upsetting God's plan or what God's doing with you. But there's some stuff that you need to work on as a human. Maybe something like that.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's really interesting. And yeah, that sense of like what are the things that we do um, in fear of somebody else's calling,
Hmm.
and as you say, that kind of sense of almost as if like the calling of God is so fragile that if we do something wrong, we might be the people who stop the next great evangelist from
Yeah,
being able to become what God has intended them to become.
yeah, yeah. There's definitely a fear, and not a like if you look at Israel, God's
Mm,
chosen people, and how many times they've messed up
mm,
and did things wrong, and yet they were
Mm.
still the the chosen people and doing that. I mean, they weren't what God had planned, or they weren't. Actually, I would say they probably are because Jesus is the ultimate fulfillment of what Israel was supposed to be. But yeah, there's a sense of even now that makes me think of holiness. Like holiness, don't go out and hang out with certain people. Don't associate with certain things. All this because then you become unclean and you become unholy, and your white robes are tainted instead of, like, I think we talked about this before, that holiness is more like a bleach, that it affects what is around it. Like the spirit in you is not going to be tainted. It's what is the situations or the circumstances or environments that you are in, and how
Mm.
does that be changed? And so it's a different mindset of fear versus, I don't want to say change, but fear versus action, shall we say. Imperfect love casts out fear. I think I read that once.
In a fortune cookie somewhere.
Fortune cookies. That's it. I was
Mm.
eating at a buffet and they had honey from a lion, and so I ate it, and then I got the fortune cookie, and
Mm.
yeah,
So what in your life, or what have you seen in kind of, church, or kind of Christian context, that have you experienced or seen, that you think is what is that driving force behind, that sense of like the frailty of either God's calling, God's holiness, that sense where, as you say, we often, if we looked back, or maybe even in the moment, sometimes we think to ourselves, like, there's got to be some pushback on this, but I guess, look at the fruit. You can't, if God wasn't really in this, we wouldn't see people's lives being changed, or people coming to Christ, or healings taking place. um and what is it, what do you think it is, like, that makes us so afraid, of like pushing back, against each other and against God? Or is that too big of a question for,
oh, are you talking about, having honest conversations, like steel sharpening steel, or are you talking about avoiding things because you don't want to get your holiness tarnished? Which which one? Or both?
um let's go with, let's go with that kind of steel sharpen steel idea, because I think that's something that I definitely, like, me have, sorry, just like,
Yeah,
we did, a whole course in college,
yeah,
which revolved around judges. Like,
yeah, yeah,
and I remember doing in depth, and I think I even presented on one of these chapters. I remember it was Christina, Stadnik. I was doing one part of Samson's life, and I was doing the other part of Samson's life.
yeah,
I had to do presentations, and yet I'm reading this, and I'm just like, this is crazy.
yeah.
Like, where is the pushback? Where's that fear, like, coming from? Because I see that in my own life. Um, where I'm like, oh, that guy's the pastor, or, that surely maybe I've got this wrong. Again, I don't want to, interrupt that person from living up the calling that God has for them. I don't
Mhm.
want to be that person who kind of ruins God's kingdom, right? Like,
Well, yeah. Okay, so there's two things I would say to that. The first one is, um, I think we have lost the ability, in the church, like what I believe is truth, right? So if you are coming, or and the way I live is truth, and if you are coming and questioning that, or even bringing up some points, bringing in some doubt or something, shall we say, then the truth that I've held is challenged. And when truth is challenged, you can either fight it or you can run away from it, right? Like, so you're going to fight it and you're going to be like, well, no, that's not right. That's same thing with Galileo or Copernicus, which is one that like actually, guys, the Earth
I think it
goes
was,
around the
yeah, I think it
sun,
was,
and they're like,
that was
Galileo, right?
Galileo, I think.
Yeah, and they're like, nope, and so they killed him. Like, there's this. If you're questioning the truth, then you're almost questioning the person because that's such a deep held truth to them that it's actually almost part of them. And so enough people have fought back about that and gotten angry that now it's, well, now I don't even want to fight about it because it's almost not even going to go anywhere and it's going to hurt relationships. We put relationships above truth seeking, where I don't want to argue. The second thing is there's lots of people in the Christian church that rightly or wrongly will tell you that you are doing things wrong all the time. I mean, if you've ever been part of a church service, I've had many people come up to me and be like, that's not part of the Bible, or
Mhm.
that's this, that's that, and it's hardly ever actually something theological. It's more personal preference to them, that they just don't like that you're doing or using. But it's always, I think we've lost the ability, and this is not just in the church, but in the world, is to have a honest conversation with one another. Not even to the point of trying to convince the other person of your argument and to win them over, but just to share your point of view and have another person accept that and share their point of view and to learn more about each other after, with that. And even allowing some of those questions, that doubt, to um, to sit with you and to wrestle with that doubt. Either you're going to come away with it, um, changing your mind and finding truth in something you haven't seen before, or you're going to be more resolved in your answer because you've questioned what you believe and you have justified it enough that now that is a stronger truth to you, more solid. Um, I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I think, I do yeah, I can resonate with the things you're saying. Is that kind of sense of defense of the truth, and
Mm,
um, and that sense of like where like your responses and your ideas are who you are, and so you feel like personally attacked, or you feel like you might be unintentionally attacking somebody if you question something that they've said, and that sense, as you say, like where kind of, especially in the West, we seem to really drive for having questions and answers. Like we always have Q&A sessions.
yeah.
And I remember in the early days of listening to the Homebrew Christianity podcast, I was really struck because they said we don't do like question and answers, we do questions and responses, because it's that
Yeah.
sense that this is like part of a bigger dialogue and a bigger discussion. And I think it's just what I'm really struck with in our conversation today, and even like with what you've been saying right now, is that sense like where like all of these things, like I guess like somehow I see it and I understand it in that kind of human, or sense of our own selves navigating the world, navigating our relationships, our identity and things like that. I think what I'm really surprised at, actually, the older I get, is like the way that we somehow see those kind of, in a ways, I guess, those kind of that bit of frailty or vulnerability, or or kind of fear to kind of push somebody back. Like we automatically then translate that into like the person, work, and calling of God somehow being also weak and vulnerable, and 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 susceptible to something that we just were afraid. It's like, and I remember this growing up. I hated going on missions trips, because I was always afraid I was going to get stuck in a conversation where I would say something that then would put somebody off of God, or would make them think that God wasn't somebody I believed God to be. And I felt like, and then I was like, and then they're going to go and burn in hell, and it will all be my fault because I wasn't prepared. I didn't have the right answer, and the Spirit surely isn't going to work through me because it's just me, right? Like, and and I'm just like, is God really that frail and that fragile, and is God's call so weak? that it can't handle the ups and downs of life, and the push, and the, like somebody who's called to, sort of like, sorry, I think for myself, I'm not gonna make this abstract. I'll say this for myself, is
Yeah.
like there are things I've been through personally in the last 2 years in particular that have been really hard work, within my own relationships, within understanding myself, within who I am in my work and my calling, and I've had to do a lot of hard work with counselors and with a work coach, and there's still stuff that's definitely ongoing through that. um, and what's crazy is that, like, I recognize the fact that I'm being pushed back is something about like strengthening and enriching, my person and my character, and I feel like I'm becoming more authentic, and not strong's not the right word, but like there's stuff being built
Stable
up in
or
me. Yeah,
rooted, maybe.
yeah, all of those good things, like a tree. I'm like
Yeah.
a big tree that people
Yeah.
want to hug.
A
No,
mighty oak by a river.
yeah. I always thought of myself more as a maple. Um, so, but like in that, like, what's crazy is that when I was even at the lowest, like, of those points where like I was getting a pushback, the thing that I was convinced of, that kind of has carried me through, and that's been shown through people as well, is that God hadn't abandoned me. God was still God. God was still there.
Yeah.
God hadn't left the calling that God's put on me. And I was just like, even it's not just the person of God and God's faithfulness that can handle my own kind of, instability or fluctuations, or wrestlings, but it's even God's call, like that. And I remember when I was nine years old, maybe it was a bit older than that. And we
Nice.
had an evangelist at our church, and he, had some calling. If people, feel like, it wasn't a rededication, but it was like, you're going to step forward and what God has for you. God wants you to, chat. And I remember sitting there and thinking, oh, I should go up, and be like, no, that's not really cool. I don't know if I want to do that. And my mom came and sat down beside me, and she just said to me, she's like, you don't have to go up now if you don't want to, but just know that there's nothing you can do to run away from God's call on your life. And then she just walked away. And like, and if you know my
It's a truth
mom,
bomb,
I
but
am, yeah, drop it and walk it. But that's like really stuck with me. And actually, now looking at like Samson, I'm just like, Samson ends up doing all these things and is remembered as like one of the famous, judges, or infamous judges of Israel. And yet you just like, you look at it, you're like, how much richer would his story have been if people had like pushed back, believing that God's call and God's faithfulness could handle a bit of, a bit of that kind of steel, sharpening steel. Sorry, I talked a lot. So
well, yeah, like when you're talking, I'm thinking of experiences in my own life where people have called me out or talked to me about something, and and even small things like my sermon or something, be like, hey, you should add this, or what about this, or I would have done this, and I'm starting to get better at it, but it's still like it irks me, and I think we tend to think that other people are thinking the our worst thoughts about ourselves, like our
mm,
insecurities, are
mm,
all that people are
mm,
speaking to us. Like everything that I don't like about myself, I'm assuming that everyone else, that's 100% of their thoughts towards me.
mm,
Um, and I wonder if that comes out of, like when you were talking about fear, like on that bus ride or the missions trip or youth thing or
mm,
whatever, talking that how much of our childhood in Christianity was based on fear, like fear
mm,
of disappointing, fear of missing your calling, fear of hell, fear of um, not being all that God has called you to be, fear of missing. Like a lot of it's based on fear, and not a lot of it was based on you know, God loves you, and God is going to be with you, and God is going to do great things with you no matter what you do. Like, just because other people put these expectations on you doesn't mean that they're right. Just because your parents want you to marry a good Jewish girl doesn't mean that Philistine harlot is not the right one. But but yeah, it's so much fear. Like I remember, and I'm sure I've told this before on this podcast, but when I was in plumbing school, I I met this guy and he was going to a birthday party, so he invited me out to this bar. And he knew that I had a little bit of college, but didn't know in what. And he had a little bit of college, didn't know what. So I sat down and he's like, "So what do you have your degree in?" And I said, "Oh, bachelor's of biblical studies." And his first question to me was, "Oh, so what can't you do?" And that was his idea of Christianity was you can't do anything, and that's based on fear. Like Christians have told them not to do something or are against things instead of what we're for. Like if if the gospel is good news, then it should be good news, not do this or this will happen to you. Um, it should be good news to people. It should be good news to the poor. It should be good news to those that are seeking things. It should be good news and not you messed up your life until now, but here's how you can fix it. Um, and don't ever go back to that, or don't ever do the same things you're doing before, or whatever. It's very fear based. Anyway,
No, I think yeah, we've hit 20 minutes and we have
and we
covered more than
barely
20
talked about
topics.
Samson. I love it. I love it.
There's some guy in there. He did something. Yeah.
Something about a lion and honey. I
Yeah.
don't know.
Yeah.
We'll get
But
into
it's
his
like
riddle
sorry.
later.
Yeah. But I think like that, actually I would say, that your final comment actually really does resonate with me in the sense of like Samson, which is like, the good news for Israel would have been freedom from the
Yeah.
Philistines. And what never seems clear from the Israelite people, including his parents, is how the way he's living out his vocation and calling is
Yeah.
anything but good news for himself. you know
Yeah.
and there's something, I think you're right, like I think that is a really good challenge to leave ourselves on and think about, is like, is our good news based upon the fact that if you accept everything I'm telling you that you shouldn't do or you are doing that you shouldn't do is true, then I've got a get out of jail free card for you if you do it all? Or is the good news like that there is a God who knows you completely and loves you completely, and there is nothing that can separate you from that love of God?
I got
um
good news for you. You can be just like me.
why sign me up?
Sign me
Sign
up.
me up. I'm
That's it.
there.
You can
I'm
be
there.
just like us. Good
Yeah.
news.
Yeah.
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah. Like
yeah.
what is that's a question. And that's what I've been thinking about is what is the gospel? Like what is the good news about the gospel and how in its simplest form, without all my preconceptions, without all my things that I've grown up believing or adding on to the gospel, in its simplest form, what is it and why is it good news? And then go from there to deconstruct it. And I know deconstruction is a big talk about fear based, right? Like deconstruction, not only tearing everything down. Yeah, you tear everything, you tear stuff down because we realize that some of our ideas have been based on a Western worldview of a book written, or a modern Western view of a book that was written in the Middle East 2,000 years ago, and some of the words we put on, or some of the terms and the words we've described or translated it through our own eyes instead of back there. And so, what's the gospel in its simplest form? And then, how do I build it from there?
Whew,
Yeah.
Derek, you're hitting it. We're gonna end up our next stretch after Samson. You have to get through Samson with us, and maybe
Yeah.
our next stretch we're gonna look at the parable of the houses built on sand and the rock, and talk a little bit about deconstruction. That's what we'll do next.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes.
No, that sounds good. Let's do that. I got a guess in mind. Yeah.
Excellent.
Okay.
Excellent. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. And if you, yeah, no, like genuinely more than anything want to say, you know, if there's any way we can open up this discussion a little bit wider and have you join in with it, let us know. We definitely want this to go beyond the two of us and the occasional guests that we have, and want this to be something a bit more. And I truly believe that, like, the Spirit of God is at work in the world, speaking through Scripture, calling us to live the good news, not out of fear, but out of love. And I want to take that journey with you. So help me figure out how to open the door and get you on the bus, and let's go.
Yeah, let's go. It's rally time.
And I'll get a hat next time. Okay?
Yeah, sounds good. All right.
All right. Take it easy, guys.
Yeah.
And gals.
Bye.